I'm going to tell you something that might disturb you, but it's the truth. The moment you feel completely ready to take action is the same moment the opportunity has already passed. I've watched nations wait for certainty before acting. I've seen individuals postpone their purpose until conditions were perfect. And I've learned this: readiness is not a feeling you wait for, it's a decision you make in the face of uncertainty. My ancestors crossed dark seas to a strange land 2 centuries ago. They weren't ready. The immigrants who built this nation weren't ready. I wasn't ready when the torpedo struck PT 109, but we moved anyway, and that made all the difference. Now, I know why you're watching this. You're standing at a threshold. Maybe it's a career change that terrifies you. Maybe it's a relationship decision you've been avoiding. Perhaps it's a dream you've been postponing, starting that business, writing that book, making that move, having that conversation, and you're waiting. Waiting for what? For confidence? For certainty? For a sign that you're ready? Let me tell you what that waiting is really costing you. Every day you delay is not neutral. It's not just time passing, it's a decision in itself. A decision to let fear govern you instead of purpose. I wrote extensively about this when I studied how England faced the threat of Hitler in the years before World War II. I wrote a book called Why England Slept, and in it I examined how democracies delay action until crisis forces their hand. But here's the hard truth I discovered through that research and through my own life. When you wait until you're forced to act, you've already surrendered your most powerful advantage. You've given up the ability to choose your moment. You think successful people felt ready when they began. You think our founding fathers felt ready to challenge the greatest empire on earth. You think the immigrants who built this nation felt ready when they left everything they knew to cross dark seas to a strange land. My own great-grandfather, Patrick Kennedy, came here in 1848 with nothing. Was he ready? He was terrified, but he came anyway. And his decision to act without readiness created possibilities that led generations later to his great-grandson becoming President of the United States. The lie you've been told is that readiness comes before action. That's backwards. It's completely backwards. Action creates readiness. When I challenged this nation to put a man on the moon within the decade, do you think our scientists felt ready? We barely had the technology to orbit the Earth. We were years behind the Soviets. But the commitment came first. The capability followed. That's how it always works. The commitment comes first, then the capability develops, not the other way around. Now, I'm not here to give you empty motivation or simple slogans. What I want to give you today is something far more valuable. I want to give you a framework for understanding why you'll never feel ready, and more importantly, what to do about it. I want to share with you the lessons I learned from studying history's greatest successes and failures, from my own experiences in war and leadership, and from our nation's immigrants who made the leap despite overwhelming uncertainty. You're going to learn why the feeling of readiness is actually a trap, why waiting for perfect conditions is how democracy nearly lost to dictatorship, and why the moments that will define your life, the decisions that will determine whether you look back with pride or regret, are precisely the ones where you'll feel most unprepared. This isn't theory. This is the distilled wisdom of what happens when nations delay, when leaders hesitate, when individuals wait for permission from their fears. And more importantly, this is about what happens when you choose differently. So let me take you back to March 1935. Winston Churchill stands in Parliament, and his voice carries a warning that should have awakened a nation. Germany, he says, has built an air force of thousands. They've introduced conscription. They're rearming at a pace that suggests only one intention: war. The government's response: we need more information. We need more time. The people aren't ready for alarm. So they waited. They commissioned studies. They debated. They sought consensus. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Hitler built and built and built. Every day, every week, every month, Germany grew stronger while Britain debated whether to prepare. 1,936 arrived. The evidence grew overwhelming. Churchill warned again. Anthony Eden, a young member of Parliament, expressed concern, but the response remained the same. We're not ready yet. We need to prepare gradually. We can't alarm the public. Do you hear that? They were so worried about alarming people that they refused to prepare them for what was coming. Do you see the trap they fell into? They were so concerned with being ready, with feeling ready, with making sure everyone felt comfortable with the decision to prepare that they never actually prepared. Because here's what I learned from studying this period intensively for my book. Waiting to feel ready and actually preparing are two completely different things. One is psychological comfort seeking. The other is strategic action despite discomfort. By 1937, some progress finally began, but it was cautious, measured, insufficient. Why? Because the government was still waiting for the British people to feel ready for sacrifice. They were waiting for perfect political conditions. They were waiting for consensus. And while they waited, Germany kept building. I wrote in Why England Slept. Any person will awaken when the house is burning down. What we need is an armed guard that will wake up when the fire first starts, or better yet, one that will not permit a fire to start at all. September 1939 came. The house was burning. Britain entered the war desperately unprepared. Unprepared, not because they lacked time, but because they spent that time waiting to feel ready instead of preparing to be ready. Do you understand the difference? They had the time, they had the resources, they had the warning. What they lacked was the willingness to act without the feeling of readiness. The cost? Thousands of lives, years of suffering, the near collapse of democracy itself, all because they mistook the feeling of readiness for the reality of preparation. Now you might think, that's war, that's nations. What does this have to do with my decision about changing careers or starting that venture? Everything. Because the psychology is identical. You're waiting for the feeling of readiness before you prepare. But preparation happens despite the lack of that feeling, not because of it. When you wait until you feel ready, you're making the same mistake Britain made. You're confusing psychological comfort with actual capability. You're prioritizing the feeling of certainty over the reality of action. And while you wait, the world moves on. Opportunities close. Time passes. Others who are willing to act, despite uncertainty, move ahead. Let me tell you about another decision that was made without the feeling of readiness. In 1848, my great-grandfather Patrick Kennedy made a choice that would echo through generations. He would leave Ireland, leave everything he'd ever known, and cross the Atlantic to America. Let me describe what this meant. Let me help you understand what he faced. He would say goodbye to his family, likely forever. In those days, leaving Ireland for America was a one-way journey. You didn't come back. You didn't visit. You left, and everyone you loved stayed behind. He would board a ship for a journey that killed 1 in 10 passengers. Think about that. 1 in 10 people who made that crossing died during the voyage. Disease, storms, starvation, the journey itself was life-threatening. He would arrive in a country where he knew no one. He spoke English, yes, but he would face prejudice at every turn. Signs saying no Irish need apply were common. He had no job waiting, no home, no certainty. He had nothing but hope and determination. He was not ready. How could anyone be ready for that? And yet, as I wrote in A Nation of Immigrants, this decision was a leap into the unknown. It was an enormous intellectual and emotional commitment. Think about the courage that required, not the courage of feeling ready, but the courage of acting without readiness. The courage to make a decision when every rational calculation might suggest staying put. What drove him? Not certainty, not comfort, not the feeling that he was prepared. What drove him was something more powerful, a belief that life could be better, and a willingness to stake everything on that belief. He looked at the life he had in Ireland during the famine, and he looked at the possibility of life in America, and he made a choice. Not a comfortable choice, not a certain choice, but a choice nonetheless. Now, here's what fascinates me about immigration. It's an act of pure faith in the future against all present evidence. Oscar Hanlon, a historian who wrote beautifully about this, said that the crossing subjected the immigrant to a succession of shattering shocks and decisively conditioned the life of every man that survived it. They weren't ready for those shocks. They couldn't be. Nobody could prepare for what that journey demanded. The ships were overcrowded. The conditions were terrible. Families were crammed into spaces barely large enough to lie down. The food was rotten. The water was contaminated. Disease spread rapidly in those cramped quarters. Night and day were indistinguishable in the dark hold of those ships. They were ever aware of the treacherous winds and waves, the scampering of rats and the splash of burials at sea. But they went anyway. And in going, they didn't just change their own lives, they built a nation. They created the very idea of America. You see, there's a profound lesson here about readiness. The people who changed history weren't the ones who felt ready. They were the ones who moved despite not feeling ready. That's not recklessness, that's wisdom. Because life's greatest opportunities don't wait for you to feel comfortable with them. My great-grandfather, Patrick Kennedy, wasn't ready. He couldn't have been ready. But his willingness to act without readiness created possibilities that led generations later to his great-grandson standing before you today, having served as President of the United States. What might your willingness to act right now without feeling ready create for your future, for your children's future, for the lives you'll touch? Think about that for a moment. Every person in America who isn't descended from the native peoples, every single one of us were here because someone in our family line decided to act without feeling ready. Someone made a leap. Someone crossed an ocean. Someone left everything familiar for something unknown, and we exist because of that decision. Now let me tell you about the longest night of my life. The 2nd of August, 1943. I'm 26 years old, commander of PT Boat 109 inches, the South Pacific. It's pitch dark, the kind of darkness that disorients you, makes you question everything. You can't see your hand in front of your face. The ocean is black, the sky is black, everything is black. We're on patrol in the Blackett Strait. My crew and I are looking for Japanese ships. But in that darkness, you can't see anything until it's right on top of you. And that's exactly what happened. Suddenly, out of that darkness, a Japanese destroyer, the Amajiri, slices through my boat like it's paper. The explosion, the fire, the screaming, it happens so fast that thinking isn't even possible. You just react. One moment, we're a functioning boat with a crew. The next moment, we're cut in half, burning, sinking, and my men are in the water. I find myself in the water. Fuel is burning on the surface. The flames are spreading. I can hear my men calling out in the darkness. 11 survivors scattered across the Black Ocean. 2 men are dead, and I'm supposed to lead the ones who are left. I'm supposed to know what to do. Here's the truth. I wasn't ready for that moment. Nothing in my life had prepared me for making decisions when every choice might mean the difference between my men living or dying. I wasn't ready to swim for 5 hours, towing an injured man by a strap clenched in my teeth. My engineer, McMahon, had been badly burned. He couldn't swim well. So I took the strap from his life jacket in my teeth and I swam for hours. And I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to survive on a tiny island with no food, no water, no rescue in sight. But here's what I learned in those dark waters. A lesson that shaped everything I would later do as president. Readiness is not a prerequisite for action. Action is how readiness is forged. You don't become ready and then act. You act, and in acting, you become ready. I had to decide. Do we stay with the wreckage and hope for rescue, or do we swim for land? I had no complete information. I couldn't know which choice was right. We were miles from the nearest island. We didn't know if there were Japanese soldiers on that island. We didn't know if we'd survive the swim. The feeling in my gut was not confidence, it was fear mixed with responsibility. But I had to choose, and I did. We swam for hours through water where sharks were known to swim, through exhaustion, through pain. I honestly didn't know if we'd make it, but we moved. And in moving and acting without the feeling of readiness, something happened. I became the leader those men needed, not because I felt ready, but because the situation demanded it, and I refused to let hesitation paralyze me. We reached an island, a small island, barely more than a sandbar with some palm trees. We had no food, no water, no way to signal for help, but we were alive. And over the next several days, I had to keep making decisions without feeling ready for any of them. Should I swim to another island looking for help? Should I try to signal passing PT boats? Should I trust the native islanders who found us? Every decision carried risk. Every choice could be the wrong one. But doing nothing was also a choice, and often the worst one. Years later, as president, I would face the Cuban Missile Crisis, nuclear weapons 90 miles from our shore, Soviet ships approaching with more missiles, 13 days where the wrong decision could end civilization. Did I feel ready? No. Did I have perfect information? Never. Our intelligence was incomplete. Our options were all risky. But I had learned something in those dark waters in the Pacific. You don't wait for the feeling of certainty to act with certainty. You make the best decision you can with the information you have, and then you commit to it completely. Here's what I want you to understand. The moments that will define your life will not come with instruction manuals. They will not wait for you to feel confident. They will come in the dark water, when you're tired, when you're scared, when you're uncertain. And your life's direction will be determined not by how ready you feel, but by whether you swim anyway. So let me now explain something about human nature that I discovered through all of this. I want to start by destroying a dangerous myth you've been carrying, that not deciding is somehow different from deciding. It isn't. When you wait to feel ready before acting, you've already made a choice. You've chosen delay over advancement, comfort over growth, certainty over possibility. Let me explain this through what I observed studying democratic responses to crisis. In the 1,930 seconds, Britain faced a clear and growing threat. Every month they delayed action was a month Germany grew stronger. But British leaders told themselves they were just gathering more information or waiting for the right political moment. They didn't see their delay as a decision, but it was. It was a decision that would cost them dearly. Here's the trap. Your brain confuses two completely different things. It confuses the absence of the feeling of readiness with the absence of actual capability. These are not the same thing. You can be capable without feeling ready. In fact, this is the state in which most significant action occurs. Think about the first time someone became a parent. Were they ready? Did they feel prepared for 2 a.m. feedings? For making decisions about another human's well-being, for the overwhelming responsibility? No. Nobody feels ready to become a parent. But millions do it every day. And they become ready through doing it, not before doing it. The baby doesn't wait for the parents to feel ready. The baby arrives, and the parents figure it out. The same principle applies to your decision right now. You're waiting to feel ready to start that business, to have that difficult conversation, to make that move. But the feeling of readiness doesn't come from contemplation, it comes from action. You become ready by beginning, not by waiting to begin. I learned this studying the decision to go to the moon. When I announced that goal in 1961, we didn't have the technology. We didn't have the knowledge. Our scientists weren't ready. We had barely put a man in orbit. The Soviets were ahead of us in every measure of space exploration, but we committed anyway. And the commitment created the readiness. The timeline forced innovation. The deadline generated capability. We went to the moon not because we were ready, but because we committed to going and then became ready through that commitment. Now, I'm not advocating recklessness. I'm not saying you should act without any thought or preparation. I'm advocating for understanding that calculated action, despite uncertainty, is not recklessness. It's leadership, it's wisdom. It's how progress happens in the real world. The readiness trap works like this. You decide you need to feel certain before you act, but the actions required to create certainty can only be taken without certainty. So you're paralyzed, you wait, and while you wait, the world moves on, opportunities close, time passes. Others who are willing to act despite uncertainty move ahead. They're not more talented than you. They're not more capable. They're just more willing to act without the feeling of readiness. Here's what I want you to write down. If I wait until I feel ready, I've already decided not to act. Because the feeling of readiness is not a prerequisite for action. It's a luxury that life rarely provides at important moments. And those who insist on it simply watch from the sidelines while history is made by those who moved despite its absence. Let me tell you about the democracy of hesitation. I discovered something studying why democracies struggle to act decisively, and it applies directly to your life. Democracies, by their nature, seek consensus. They debate, they deliberate, they want everyone to feel comfortable with decisions before acting. This is their great strength. It ensures multiple perspectives are heard. But it's also their great weakness when decisive action is needed. I wrote in Why England Slept. It's the system that functions in the pinches that survives. And here's what I learned. Systems that require feeling ready before acting will always lag behind systems that act and then adjust. Always. Without exception. Think about your own decision-making process. How many voices are you consulting? Your fears say wait. Your doubts say you're not ready. Your desire for comfort says maybe later when conditions are better. Just like a democracy with too many committees and not enough action, you're creating internal gridlock. You're waiting for all the voices in your head to agree, but they never will. But here's the deeper insight. This hesitation serves a purpose. It protects you from risk. It shields you from potential failure. It maintains your current comfort. The problem is, it also protects you from growth, shields you from success, and maintains your current limitations. I saw this pattern repeat throughout history. Nations that waited for perfect consensus before acting were nations that lost their window of opportunity. Leaders who insisted on complete information before deciding were leaders who became irrelevant. Individuals who demanded the feeling of readiness before beginning never began. The dictatorships had an advantage here, not a moral advantage, but a strategic one. Hitler didn't wait for consensus. Stalin didn't deliberate endlessly. They acted. And democracies found themselves constantly behind, constantly reacting, never ahead. They were always preparing for the last threat while new threats emerged. Now you might say, but I don't want to be a dictator over my own life. I want to make thoughtful decisions. Good. You should. But understand the difference between thoughtful consideration and endless delay, between gathering information and hiding from decision, between prudence and paralysis. Here's the framework. You need enough information to make a reasoned judgment, but you'll never have enough information to guarantee success. That gap between reasoned judgment and guaranteed success, that's where action must occur. That's where courage lives. That's where life happens. In your own life, you're running a democracy of competing interests. Your ambition votes one way, your fear votes another, your comfort wants to maintain the status quo, your potential demands change, and you're waiting for unanimous agreement that will never come. If you wait for all these voices to agree, you'll wait forever. The answer isn't to become authoritarian with yourself. It's to recognize that leadership, whether of nations or of your own life, means making decisions when consensus is impossible. It means acting when some voices inside you are still uncertain. It means understanding that this discomfort is not a signal to wait. It's a signal that you're at a genuine decision point, that you're facing something real, something meaningful, something worth doing. Now, I want to tell you about the most powerful force I've ever witnessed. It's not military might, it's not economic power. It's something far more profound. It's people choosing voluntarily to do hard things for meaningful reasons. I wrote that the essence of democracy is voluntary action and cooperation. But this principle extends far beyond government. It's the essence of a meaningful life. It's the difference between forced compliance and chosen commitment, between resignation and dedication, between merely existing and truly living. Think about the immigrants who built this nation. Nobody forced them to come. Nobody compelled them to endure those terrible ocean crossings. They chose it. And that choice, that voluntary commitment to something uncertain but meaningful, that's what created the American spirit. That's what made this nation different from every other nation in history. Now, apply this to your situation. Whatever decision you're facing, you have the profound freedom to choose, but with that freedom comes responsibility. The responsibility to choose meaningfully, to choose despite the uncertainty, to choose growth over comfort. Here's what I discovered. Voluntary action has a quality that forced action can never have. When you choose to act, truly choose, despite fear, despite uncertainty, you engage your whole self. You bring creativity, resilience, determination that can't be summoned through coercion. When you're forced to do something, you do the minimum required. When you choose to do something, you bring your full capacity to bear. But here's the challenge. Voluntary action requires you to overcome inertia without external pressure. There's no dictator forcing you to start that business. No authority compelling you to have that difficult conversation. No crisis demanding you make that change. Just you and your decision. Just you and your will. This is actually your advantage, though it doesn't feel like it. Because when you act voluntarily, when you choose to move despite not feeling ready, you own that choice completely. There's no one else to blame. No circumstances to credit. Just your decision and its consequences. And that ownership is what creates character. That's what builds the person you're becoming. I've seen this in leadership. The orders I gave as president were far less powerful than the vision I articulated that people chose to pursue. When I challenged America to reach the moon, I wasn't commanding it. I was inviting voluntary commitment to something difficult but meaningful. And people responded not because they had to, but because they chose to. Because the vision was worth the sacrifice. Because the goal mattered more than the comfort of staying where we were. Your life is asking you for the same thing right now. Not forced compliance with someone else's timeline, but voluntary commitment to your own potential. The decision you're avoiding isn't being demanded of you by external forces. It's being invited by your own aspirations. And that invitation will remain open only so long. Here's the truth about voluntary action. It requires more courage precisely because it's optional. You could choose not to. You could stay where you are. And that's what makes choosing to move forward so powerful. That's what makes it meaningful. Because you didn't have to. You chose to. The question isn't, am I ready? The question is, am I willing to choose this? Because readiness will follow choice, not precede it. Let me tell you what separates theory from reality, intention from action, dreams from achievement. It's a principle I learned from studying why some nations survived crisis and others collapsed. I call it the test of the pinch. I wrote, any system of government will work when everything is going well. It's the system that functions in the pinches that survives. But this isn't just about governments. It's about people. It's about you. Anyone can function when conditions are ideal, when you feel confident, when resources are abundant, when the path is clear. Anyone can act then. A child could make decisions when everything is easy. But what happens when conditions aren't ideal? When you don't feel confident? When resources are scarce and the path is unclear? That's the pinch. And that's where character is revealed. That's where you discover what you're really made of. Here's what I observed. People treat their life like that unprepared democracy, working fine in good times, collapsing when challenged. They make decisions based on favorable conditions, then abandon those decisions when conditions get hard. They start with enthusiasm but lack the system that functions in the pinch. But successful people, people who actually accomplish meaningful things, they build different systems. They build systems that work, especially when they don't feel ready. Systems that function when motivation is low. Systems that continue when conditions are difficult. They expect the pinch. They plan for it. They build their lives to function precisely when they don't feel like functioning. Let me give you a concrete example. When I committed this nation to the moon landing, I didn't just make an announcement and hope people felt motivated. I created systems, deadlines, accountability, resources, teams that would function even when enthusiasm waned, because I knew it would wane. I knew there would be setbacks. I knew there would be moments when people didn't feel ready, when the goal seemed impossible, when the easy path would be to give up. The system had to work anyway. The commitment had to outlast the feeling. Your life needs the same thing. You can't rely on feeling ready. You need systems that work when you don't feel ready. What does that mean practically? It means you don't wait for motivation to start. You start and let momentum create motivation. It means you don't wait for confidence to act. You act and let results build confidence. It means you create commitments that outlast your feelings, because feelings are temporary. Feelings fluctuate, but commitments, real commitments, public commitments, those endure. When I made that decision to swim in the dark water after PT 109 was destroyed, I didn't have a system in place. But I had something else. I had made a commitment to my men that superseded my feelings. I was responsible for them. That responsibility didn't depend on whether I felt confident. It didn't depend on whether I felt ready. It existed regardless of my feelings. And that commitment functioned in the pinch when my fear wanted to paralyze me. You need to create that for yourself. Not a feeling-dependent approach to your decision, but a commitment-based one. A system that says, I will act on this decision regardless of whether I feel ready. Then you build the structure around that commitment. Here's the hard truth. If your ability to act depends on feeling ready, you've built a system that will fail you precisely when you most need it to work, because the moments that matter most are always the ones where you feel least prepared. The job interview, when the stakes are highest, the conversation that could change your relationship, the decision that could alter your career. These moments come when you don't feel ready, and if you've built a system that requires readiness, you'll fail at these moments. The test of your personal system isn't whether it works when you're motivated. It's whether it works in the pinch when you're tired, when you're scared, when you don't feel ready. Can your system function then? Because if it can't, it's not really a system at all. It's just a collection of good intentions that work only under ideal conditions that rarely exist. So now I'm going to give you something concrete. A practice I developed based on everything I learned about decision-making under uncertainty. I call it the 3-day action protocol. Here's how it works. Once you've identified a decision you've been delaying, you give yourself exactly 3 days, not 3 weeks, not 3 months, 3 days, to gather the information you realistically need, and then you act, not when you feel ready, when the 3 days are up. Day 1, define the decision clearly. Write it down. What exactly are you deciding? Not vaguely, specifically. Not should I change careers, but should I submit my resignation on Monday and start the freelance consulting business I've been planning? Clarity eliminates half the paralysis. When you force yourself to define exactly what you're deciding, the decision often becomes clearer. Then ask, what's the real risk? Not the imagined catastrophe, but the actual, probable risk. Write it down. Most fears evaporate when forced into concrete terms. You're not going to die. You're not going to end up homeless. The actual risk is usually much smaller than the feeling of risk. Define it precisely. Day 2. Gather only necessary information. Not every possible piece of information, just what you need to make a reasoned judgment. Talk to 2 people who have done what you're considering. Not 10 people, 2. Research for 2 hours, maximum. More than that, and you're hiding, not preparing. You're using research as a delay tactic, not as preparation. Then ask, what's one small step I can take toward this decision that's reversible? Because here's a secret. Most decisions aren't actually final. They're directional. You can start, learn, and adjust. You don't have to know the entire path. You just need to take the first step. Day 3. Make the decision. Not tentatively, not maybe. Decide. Commit. Act. Tell someone what you're doing. Accountability transforms intention into reality. When you tell another person what you've decided, it becomes real. It becomes something you're actually doing, not just thinking about. Then, and this is crucial, detach from the feeling of readiness. Don't ask yourself, do I feel ready? Ask yourself, have I done enough to make a reasoned decision? If yes, the feeling of readiness is irrelevant. The feeling doesn't matter, the decision matters. This protocol works because it gives you just enough time to prepare without enough time to procrastinate. 3 days is long enough to gather genuine information, short enough that fear doesn't have time to construct elaborate justifications for delay. 3 days doesn't give your doubts time to multiply. I've used variations of this throughout my career. When making critical decisions as president, I would set a deadline for when the decision must be made, then use the time before that deadline efficiently rather than endlessly. The deadline forced action. The preparation before it ensured the action was reasoned, but the deadline was non-negotiable. Try this with your decision this week. 3 days, then move. You'll discover something profound. The feeling of readiness often arrives after you begin, never before. Now I want to give you another practice. This one is based on what I learned studying immigration, how millions of people made irrevocable commitments to uncertain futures. I want you to create what I call a commitment ritual. Here's what you do. Take a moment. It doesn't have to be elaborate, but it needs to be intentional. Find a quiet space, then speak aloud. And I mean actually speak, not just think. Speak your commitment to the decision you've been avoiding. Say something like this. I commit to taking this step despite not feeling ready. I acknowledge the uncertainty. I accept that I don't have perfect information. And I choose to move forward anyway, because this matters to me more than my comfort. Write this commitment down. Date it. Sign it. This isn't mystical, it's psychological. You're creating a tangible artifact of your decision. Something you can return to when doubt creeps back in. And doubt will creep back in. That's normal. But having this written commitment helps you remember that you already decided. The decision is made. Now you're just executing it. Now here's the crucial part. Share this commitment with one person you trust. Tell them what you've decided and by when you'll take the first action. This creates accountability. And accountability is how voluntary commitment sustains itself through difficulty. When only you know about your decision, it's easy to change your mind. When someone else knows, when you've spoken it aloud, it becomes harder to back out. Not impossible, but harder. And that small amount of social pressure is often enough to keep you moving forward. The immigrants who came to America often did something similar. They would gather their families before leaving and make declarations of their commitment. They would tell their communities they were leaving. This made turning back psychologically difficult, not impossible, but difficult enough that they had to face their decision fully. They couldn't just quietly change their mind. They had to own their choice. You need the same mechanism. Make your decision socially real, not just mentally entertained, because mental commitments evaporate under pressure. Social commitments you've spoken and shared, those have weight. Those create obligation to your future self. Finally, create a physical symbol of this commitment. It could be anything: a stone you carry, a note in your wallet, a photo on your desk, something that reminds you, I already decided. I'm no longer waiting to feel ready. I'm acting on my commitment regardless of my feelings. This ritual works because it moves your decision from the realm of intention to the realm of identity. You're not someone thinking about making a change. You're someone who is committed to change and is now executing that commitment. And now, the daily practice. I want to give you something you can do every single day that builds capability while you're moving forward. Because remember, you don't wait to be ready, but you can build readiness as you go. Every morning, ask yourself, what's one action I can take today that moves me toward my decision regardless of how I feel? Not 5 actions. 1, not when you feel motivated. Today, this morning, before noon. This could be microscopic at first. Send 1 email, make 1 phone call, write 1 paragraph, read 1 article. The size doesn't matter, the consistency does. Because you're building the system that functions in the pinch, the system that works whether you feel ready or not. Then, every evening, acknowledge what you did. Write it down. Today, I took 1 step toward my goal. I felt fear, uncertainty, doubt, and I acted anyway. This builds evidence against the lie that you need to feel ready to act. You're proving to yourself daily that action precedes readiness, not the other way around. You're teaching your brain a new pattern. Here's why this works. Your brain learns from behavior, not from thought. You can think about being brave 1,000 times, and it won't make you brave. But act bravely once, and your brain registers it. Act bravely every day for a week, and your brain starts to expect it. Every day you act, despite not feeling ready, you're teaching your brain that readiness isn't required. You're building a new pattern, and patterns, once established, become automatic. I use this principle constantly. As president, I couldn't wait for days when I felt completely prepared for the decisions I faced. So I built the practice of making decisions at scheduled times regardless of whether I felt certain. The practice created the capability. The repetition built the strength. After a while, making decisions without complete information became natural. Not comfortable, but natural. Do the same with your decision. Don't wait for the one perfect day when you feel completely ready to make a major move. Instead, make small moves daily, building momentum, building capability, building evidence that you can act despite uncertainty. Within 2 weeks of this practice, you'll notice something. You're further along than you would have been if you'd waited to feel ready. Within a month, you'll be somewhere completely different. Not because you magically gained readiness, but because you moved without it and built readiness through movement. Remember, readiness is not a prerequisite. It's a product, the product of acting despite its absence. So let me bring this to a close by telling you something that matters more than anything else I've shared today. You are facing a decision. I don't know what it is specifically, but I know this. It's significant enough that you've been delaying it. Significant enough that you've been waiting to feel ready. Significant enough that you chose to spend this time listening to me talk about action and uncertainty and courage. And I want you to know you're right to take it seriously. This decision does matter. Your hesitation isn't weakness. It's intelligence, recognizing genuine consequence. But what I need you to understand is this. Your intelligence can serve either wisdom or fear. It can help you make reasoned judgments despite uncertainty, or it can construct elaborate justifications for delay. I studied nations that delayed until crisis forced their hand. I lived through my own moment in dark water where delay wasn't an option. I've led in situations where perfect information was impossible, but decision was necessary. And here's what I learned. You will never feel ready, not truly, not completely. And that's not a flaw in you. That's the human condition at moments of genuine choice. The feeling you're waiting for, that sense of complete confidence, of certainty, of preparedness, it arrives after you begin, not before. It's forged through action, not contemplation. The immigrants who built this nation, my great-grandfather among them, they had less information, less preparation, less support than you have right now. They crossed dark seas. They started with nothing. They weren't ready. But their willingness to act without readiness created everything we have today. Created the freedom you enjoy, created the opportunities you have access to, created the very possibility that you could sit here today considering a decision about your future. Your decision, whatever it is, has that same quality. It's a threshold. And thresholds aren't crossed by those who wait to feel comfortable with crossing. They're crossed by those who decide the other side matters more than the comfort of staying put. So here's what I'm asking of you. Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, today, right now. Identify one specific action you can take toward your decision. One step. Maybe it's making a phone call, sending an email, having a conversation, writing down a plan, submitting an application. It doesn't have to be irreversible. It just has to be real. It has to be something that moves you forward, even 1 inch. Take that one step today. Not because you feel ready, because you've decided that your future matters more than your comfort with uncertainty. Because you understand that waiting for readiness is just choosing delay by another name. Because you're ready to build the system that functions in the pinch, the system that works whether you feel ready or not. And then tomorrow, take another step. And the next day, another. Not when motivation strikes. Not when confidence returns. Every day, regardless of feeling. That's how readiness is built. That's how lives are changed. That's how history is made by ordinary people doing extraordinary things without the luxury of feeling prepared for them. I'll leave you with this. Decades from now, when you look back on your life, you won't remember the decisions you delayed. You won't remember the days you waited to feel ready. You'll remember the moments you acted despite uncertainty. Those are the moments that will have defined who you became. Those are the moments you'll be proud of, not because they were comfortable, not because you felt ready, but because you acted anyway. And in acting, you became someone stronger, someone braver, someone more capable than you were before. So make this one of those moments. I'm asking you not to ask what the world can do to make you feel ready. I'm asking what you can do to move forward, despite never feeling completely prepared. Because that question and how you answer it, that's what will determine everything else. Now go. Begin. The water may be dark, but you know how to swim. You've always known. You just needed to be reminded that swimming doesn't require feeling ready. It requires choosing to move through the water despite the darkness. If this message resonated with you, take one simple action right now. Subscribe to this channel so you continue receiving wisdom that challenges comfortable thinking and inspires meaningful action. Leave a comment telling me what decision you've been delaying and what first step you'll take this week. And if you know someone who's waiting to feel ready before beginning something important, share this video with them. Sometimes the push we need comes from knowing we're not alone in facing uncertainty. Remember, I'm not asking you to be ready. I'm asking you to begin.